So today we are on the third of the four foundations of mindfulness, mindfulness of mind. Today's class will be part one of two. So in this foundation, there are three exercises, and I'll just be covering the first of the three, which is the exercise of observing the desiring mind, kindness. So today we'll just stick with the first exercise, since desiring is a big topic all on its own. So I think it requires its own space. Contents of the mind, right, are these psychological phenomena called mental formations, or chitta samkara in Sanskrit. Feelings are also mental formations, but because they're so broad and it's a big topic all on its own, it was covered in the second foundation of mindfulness. But feelings is considered technically a mental formation as well. So what remains then is all the other psychological phenomena, like perception, mental formation, and consciousness. And these are also the functions of observation in the mind. And so the formations, just like the feelings, can either be mental, physical, or physiological. And in the Sutra of the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, the Satipatthana, it actually lists 28 types of mental formations. And these mental formations are desire, anger, ignorance, disturbance, narrowness, limitedness, lack of concentration, lack of freedom, dullness and drowsiness, agitation and remorse, and doubt, and their opposites, not desiring, not hate, freedom, absence of doubt, absence of dullness and drowsiness, absence of agitation, as well as mindfulness, distaste, peace, joy, ease, and letting go. It's a mouthful. But those are the those are the mental formations that would pretty much cover everything else, right? All other psychological phenomena. So the observance of observing the mind, right? The exercise to observe the mind is pretty much the same as the mindfulness of body and feelings, right? So we observe the mind in the mind, the same way that we observe the body in the body and the feelings of the feelings. The arising and the presence and the disappearance of these mental formations, right? That's how we track what's going on in the mind. That's how we apply the power of mindfulness to these practices, is simply observing the arising of those formations, right? Seeing them form in our minds, or be present and seeing them disappear, right? Because all mental formations are impermanent. We know that. I think, at least I hope we know that. Human beings is to not follow this formula of seeing them arise, seeing them form, and seeing them disappear. What we often do is, as they arise, right, we have a habit of attaching or clinging to those feelings, right, or those mental formations, whether it's a daydream that you're having or desires, and we go along with it, right, until we either do something about it. So we go get that cake, we go get that drug, we go get that whatever, and we fulfill that desire. Or if we're more fortunate, then we get distracted by other things in life and forget about it, right? This is the unmindful mind. That's how the unmindful mind works. But if we are mindful, then we have the power to observe the arising of that formation. You have the power to see it, or see its presence, understand what it is, put that label onto it, and then acknowledge its impermanence and let it go, right? Letting it go in itself doesn't have, and at least I hope that in your practice, when you're sitting in meditation, right, and you're following the breath or whatever the object of meditation is, and a distraction arises and you put a label on it, right, what should happen, just spitting out a word for this label. What gives that label power is if you're applying enough mindful observation to whatever that distraction is, and you're giving that label power, meaning that you're not just simply seeing it, but you're not just simply seeing, but you're observing, right? You're acknowledging, you're accepting, and that's what gives it power. And once you make that observation effort to let it go, it'll just go, right? That was a tongue twister. So I'm going to repeat myself in a more simplistic way, I hope. When we're sitting in meditation and we're observing the breath, right? The door opens. Okay, I'm going to use the example of the door because it's the loudest. The door opens. Simply acknowledging the door opening or acknowledging that someone entered the door in itself may not be enough to assuage, to remedy that distraction, to remedy the mind from holding on to that sound of the door. It may further questioning who's there, what are they doing, why are they disturbing my meditation, who are they, how many people are there, are they young, are they old, are they new, have they been here before, have they not been here from before, do I know their name, do they know my name? All these things can happen, even while acknowledging the door. Right? That's a lesser type, putting true awareness to the sound of the door opening, right? Meaning that when we place true awareness onto something, when we place the power of true mindfulness onto something, that we acknowledge it for what it is. We observe it and we see it for what it is. In this case, this is a true label, whether you label as door, sound, or whatever it is, right? Without making commentary that was too loud, too long, etc., right? It's the simple fact of you know exactly what had happened, and you know it for what it is. That's the true power of mindfulness, right? That's true mindfulness. It's not a door, it's not someone entering, it's not someone disturbing my meditation. All that's just fluff. All that's just... So observe the mind when you're practicing labeling. How are you labeling? How long is your label, right? Because there could be a label, but is there a story with it? Is there a commentary with it, right? So we have to be observant of those as well. So I'm mixing Vietnamese with English now. So is why. Why do we practice? Why? No, that's not the question. So exercise 13 is observing the desiring mind, being or longing, right? So form, sound, smell, and taste, right? All these are the objects of the 5 kinds of sense desires that we have, which are desires for money, sex, reputation, good food, and sleep, right? These are the 5 basic categories of desires that all humans have, right? All you're craving in life is money, sex, good food, reputation, and sleep. Then where's the room to practice, right? Some of us may have 1 or 2 of these. Some of us may fluctuate between all of them all at once. Some of us may fluctuate between having none of these desires. Or some of us may be stuck in one desire for as long as our entire life is aware. Our mind and thoughts do shift and turn to desiring, right? We need to immediately try to give rise to that awareness of the presence of that desire, of the desiring mind, right? So if a desire arises, try to be mindful that this is a mind longing for a reputation. This is a mind longing for sexual desire. This is a mind that is desiring reputation. This is a mind pain caused by sexual desire. So in the sutra itself, the Satipatthana Sutra on the 4 foundations of mindfulness, it teaches that that when desiring is not present, that we also need to observe that not desiring, when desiring is not present, we also need to observe that it is not present. So even when we're not desiring, we need to know that we're not desiring, right? because not desiring is still desiring, right? it's just a, and so the Buddha tells us that we can practice something like this. At this time, the mind is desiring wealth is not present. At this time, sexual desire is not present. At this time, the mind desiring reputation is not present, etc. This is the root of the absence of the desire for wealth. This is the root of the absence of the mind desiring reputation, etc. This is a sense of ease. This is a sense of ease that accompanies the absence of a mind desiring reputation, etc. So he's giving us kind of 3 points here that of the observation of the desiring of the not desiring that desire. And the Buddha has often said that many people confuse desire with happiness. And he tells a story of that is in the Magandhya Sutra. There was a man that was forced to live in the forest because he had leprosy, right? So he suffered from severe itching and stinging, suffering of itching and scratching and whatnot. Now he had dug a hole in the forest and filled it with branches and coal and whatnot to make a fire, right? So he made a fire to build heat. And that he would sit near the fire with his arms out, right? And the heat of the hole would lessen pain from his leprosy. Healed years later. And he was able to go back to the village, right? Because they kind of kicked him out of the village because he had leprosy. Many years later, as he was walking through the forest, he saw a group of other men who had leprosy, right? All these lepers just kind of dragging themselves on the ground, right? In order to get to the fire, right? They're dragging themselves so they can get to the hole of fire. And the man originally who had done the same thing before, right? Now he was going near the fire, and that fire, which was once a place of comfort that gave him comfort from pain, now is causing him pain because it's too hot, right? And so then the Buddha, when he was telling the story, said that desire is also just a hole of burning charcoal in the forest. Only those who are sick look on desire as happiness. So we're all sick, right? Because he's using the Dharma as the prescription to help us see the types of desires, to see the types of suffering that to see the types of suffering that are causing it. To see the type of desires that are causing us suffering. And then he went on and said that true happiness, the Buddha said, is a life with few desires, with few possessions, and the time to enjoy the many wonders that are in us and around us. The sutras also describe, or at least record a story of life of no desire. And so one night when he was meditating in the forest at I think he was at the monastery, at the bamboo forest monastery, and he had gone into meditation, and a monk, I don't know how many there are, but anyway, somebody had told on this monk to the Buddha, right? Someone knocked on this Buddha to the Buddha. And the monk who went told the Buddha, he said, Lord Buddha, there's this monk Buddha had shouted out, "Oh, happiness, happiness." He must be missing his former life of a high status. The Buddha had called out to Badiya and asked him, "Oh, Badiya, was it true that in your meditation you had shouted out twice, 'Oh happiness, oh happiness'?" And Badiya said, "Yes, Venerable Sir, that is true. I felt this because I remembered that as a governor, my life was just full of chaos and stress. I was constantly guarded by these guards day and night at my house when I went out, where I have a retinue of guards. Someone's trying to kill me for my riches and whatnot, so he was always anxious, right? But then he said in meditation, because I had none of that anymore, I had no desire or have no desire for that form of life, I acknowledge that, oh happiness, this is true happiness, right? The happiness of, and he had mentioned that I have no fear now. I don't fear assassins, I don't feel robbers, because there's nothing to steal from me. I have nothing of a value for me to fear to be assassinated or to be robbed. And so he shouted out, "Oh happiness, oh happiness." And then the Buddha praised the monk Badiya and said to the Sangha that the monk Badiya is making steady and stable progress of joy even gods long for. In the Vijnanavada school of Buddhist psychology, or also Yogacara, or consciousness only or mind only school, there is the concept of desirelessness, which is the absence of longing for something, right? And it's classified as one of the 11 wholesome mental formations. Believe it or not, yes, there are wholesome mental formations. The feelings of joy, peace, and ease that the monk Badiya had felt, that he had realized by living a simple life. So simplicity is to have few desires and to be content with just a few possessions. Desirelessness is the basis of true happiness, because in true happiness there must be. So be like Badiya. Have few desires and have less possessions. And I'll go back to a lot of times when people have the idea of monks and nuns of being totally at peace, totally happy, totally content. There's no problems in the world. Well, we do have problems. We do have anger. But behind the scenes, monks and nuns know how to control that anger, know what to do with the arising of a simple life, right? Because truly, when you're ordained as a monk or nun, you have only 3 possessions: your robe, your alms bowl, and a sitting mat, right? This is all you have. And so you don't have to worry. We don't worry about a house payment. We don't worry about needing to be promoted at work. We don't worry about having to pay property taxes on this $1 million home. We don't have worry of this and that, right? So there's a thing. But the point is the whole aspect of desiring is the negative side of desiring, right? Because as I mentioned, there are wholesome mental formations, wholesome desires, right? But what makes a desire bad is the attachment that we have to it. It's the craving that we have, a desire to want to become enlightened, right? We need the desire to want to do well in the world, right? Especially if you're a lay person, you're a family person, you have a family, you need the desire to want to do well for your family, so you're able to afford to take care of them, right? You need a good job so they can have a good life, good home, good food, etc. These desires and ensure that they don't become attachments, that we don't become attached to the desires of wanting to have a good life for our family, right? Yes, do well at work to be promoted, to have a better job, have a better position, have a better ability to afford good things for your family. But on the potential negative side of that is, well, what do you do in order to get to that position? Are you doing unwholesome negative things at work? Are you throwing people under the bus? Are you blackmailing somebody in order to get? What are those roots causing? Are those roots wholesome? Are they unwholesome, right? What are we doing with those? So even when we have a mind of wanting to do good desire, it has a high possibility that we have some sort of negative or unwholesome ways or means of getting there. So that's why I always say, why do you feel like you need this? Why do you feel like this is an important thing to have or want, right? Did I already mention what the 11 wholesome formations is? Our faith, mindfulness, moral shame, moral fear, non-greed or desirelessness, non-hatred, wisdom, loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. These are the sets. Will not bring attachment, right? They have I don't say will not, but these in and of themselves do not have roots of clinging, right? I'm just saying if I want to go on. There's lots to say. Anyway, I'll stick with questioning desire. Just mean questioning wanting a new car or a bigger house, right? These could be even subtle little things. Even when you're meditating and you're feeling pain, right? What comes with the feeling of pain? The desire to not have pain, exactly. So if there's a desire there, then there's room for questioning. Why? Right? Why do I feel pain? Or why do I want to not have pain? Pain is the object. Not wanting pain is what needs to be questioned. So even little subtle things like that we need to question, right? Because it's of course so easy to question the bigger things, bigger house, new car, wanting to recognize. But it's the internal formations that are more difficult because of their subtlety that makes it a little bit more difficult to observe directly. These subtle mental formations, the easier it becomes to recognize them throughout the day off the meditation cushion, right? Because you still have those same desires outside, right? When you hit yourself against a car or something, or you stub your toe on the corner of a table or whatever it is, right? These are still pains, right? You still want to make adjustments to the body and whatnot. And so it's not just the desire for not wanting pain isn't just happening on them, so be aware of questioning. Because that's one of the aspects, right? It's not just the observance of our desire, but it's the observance of the root, right? That's a potential unwholesomeness or negativity. Then we arise at the ease of being able to let it go, right? And so that's the observing of that desire and recognizing the ease of the absence of that desire is what will bring us toward true happiness. Oh, I desire food, and saying, oh, okay, now I don't desire food. Don't think that's it, right? It's too easy. It's not how it works. It's not how it works. As we were talking about, I think it was last class, there's a difference between understanding impermanence and realizing impermanence, right? This, ironically, it's not ironic, but think. So these two collaborated and gave me this idea. I'm like, you know what, that's an excellent topic. So in the retreat on the 28th of June, it's a whole topic. is about desire and letting go of our attachments with those desires. So if you have many attachments or many desires, how we can let them go. I can't guarantee an aha moment for you. That's all on you. But I'm going to give you, I hope I will give you enough direction to recognize true realization versus just understanding. Because understanding is, it's easy. Superficially, we understand that things are impermanent, right? We understand that if I pull flowers out of the roots in the ground, the flower's going to die, right? I know that. We all know that. I know that if I punch someone in the face, I know that's bad. I know that drinking is potentially bad, especially if you're drinking and driving, right? We know that that's bad. So understanding impermanence or understanding desire is not the same as realizing. Because when you realize something, when you have that aha moment and you penetrate that realization, it clicked. You know that that was a true moment of realization, right? It's indescribable. I can't describe. I can only describe how it felt for me, but I can't, that feeling is not universal, right? You may have a big fireworks show in the mind, right? Or you can just be like, okay, I got it. Right? So, but that's how you're gonna know, right? Of course, that's not the full story. But that's in a very condensed form. That's how. So that is because y'all know I do love to talk, and when I go on tangent, it's difficult to stop. So I'm gonna try of all the retreats I've ever held, I'm gonna try my hardest for this one to maintain it. I'm gonna give Quang my what's the word? What's the Cliff Notes version? If I go off topic, I'm gonna give him like a red flag or something, just to be like back on track. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go on and on and on, right? As true retreat should be, I won't worry about it. But unfortunately, we only have 12 hours, and only 3 of those hours are to talk. So, truly don't have time. But since we'll finish all the exercises for this foundation of the mind by the retreat, that'll help us during the retreat, during the meditations, right? Because if you think about it, desiring and anger are probably the 2 most mental formations that occur in our everyday life, right? So I'd mentioned that we have, 28 mental formations. And of course, desire is the very first one, and anger is the very second one. So these are the 2 strongest. And since we'll finish the exercises and finish the 3rd foundation by the retreat, I'll give you ready to tackle those desires, at least the heavy ones that will arise throughout your life. Or throughout your day, sorry. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking now, so we have time to meditate. Questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? Yes.
When you talked about the 11 wholesome mental formations, how each group looked like.
What does non-hatred mean?
To not hate.
Okay. Isn't that what non-hatred is?
But I guess I get a little confused when I talk about like opposite. It seems like that's the hate and love. It's not love, it's just a neutral thing.
Non-hatred here is metta, loving, free of suffering, or compassion, right? To be free of suffering. That's it. So I don't want you to suffer. I don't want you to pretty much suffering, right? Mental, physical, and psychological. Right. It's the absence. It's just the absence of hatred. Non-hatred is the absence of hatred. So if there's no hatred, then what's left?
But I wouldn't say there's love either, just the absence of hatred.
Well, don't think of love as like, oh, I love you, right? That's not what love necessarily means. Love just means, in a non-romantic sense, you to suffer, right? Like we love our animals, our pets, for instance, right? We're not in love with them, I hope, but we love them enough that we care enough that we don't want them to suffer, right? We want them to be healthy. We want them to be fat and jolly, right? So it's a sense of, I guess love isn't really a great word because you think of love in a very attached kind of way, but it really just means more or less just care for well-being. There, care for well-being, for their well-being. Yeah, that's why I'm trying to get away from the word love because if I should have even said that, because yeah, I want to take care of you and whatnot, and they go crazy when the pets pass away. So there's a level of attachment there when we love, right? If you simply just care for something or someone's well-being, right, and you provide them what you can for them to be well, then whatever happens, we understand that, okay, the passing away is natural, getting sick is natural, and so whatever may or may happen is a natural process. We don't have it and try again. Any other questions? Hatred is what?
Subject and object.
Yeah. Hatred actually arises from desire, right? Because think of some hate, right? Where does that hatred come from? Why did you hate that thing or person or place or thing?
So perspective of what I'm thinking about. If you see some object, then there's a relation of hate to just love or not hating or something. But there's no subject object concept. Then who is hating who?
That's the ultimate question. Talking last weekend, and you would bring something up. I felt like this. I'm like, well, who's this I feeling? Oh, I don't know who this is I, right? And then I can't even think of anything right now. But that's part of the questioning, right? Who is hating? Where is this hate coming from? Right? That's a big question, right? That has to do with non-self, right? And so when we apply the three characteristics mentioned last time, and suffering, these are the three things we ask ourselves when anything arises, right? So Atman, non-self. Who is the self? Because if we say that I am desiring, well then who's saying I? Right? If I say Quang Tree is desiring, well who's saying Quang Tree is desiring? That means there has to be two little people inside my head. One's telling the other what to say. Well then who's telling the first person what to say to the second person? Right? And the list goes on and on and on. Sometimes, especially when you're in a moment of anger, ask yourself, who's angry? Right? And if you imagine these little people in your mind talking to itself, it shifts your mentality from anger to humor, right? Because you can realize how that's a very stupid thing to be, right? To think. So it kind of brings some humor. The ultimate goal of our Buddhist practice, or not even Buddhist practice, but the ultimate goal to enlightenment is to get rid of this non-self, because this non-self is what causes suffering, and what causes our suffering is the non-realization of impermanence, right? That's why I just said it. And what's impermanence? I'm crazy. I'm losing my mind. But you know what I mean. Anyway, it's non-self, suffering, and impermanence, right? The realization of those three aspects is what will bring us enlightenment. As we get to the fourth foundation, other than the foundation or the mindfulness long, it's going to be at least 2 or 3 classes all on its own. Oh goodness, will we make it for the retreat? Who's having these mental formations comes into play. Before we even ask those questions of who is desiring or who's hating, we have to understand the aspects that led us. I mean, I guess technically you can, but it's not the preferred method. What the preferred method is when anger does arise, instead of asking yourself who's feeling anger right away, we have to understand where the anger came from. Because if we can see the story of how that anger occurred, or what caused the anger, in and of itself, of that journey, we can see the aspects of non-self, figuring out how that anger arose, right? Because if you just ask yourself straight away, who is feeling this anger? You'll have to meditate on it for days, weeks, years, before you come to a realization. How did it arise? What are the causes that created this anger? And then in that little journey of you asking those questions, we will see the aspects of non-self in it, right? That person caused this to cause me this anger. And when you recognize that they don't have the power, then you take away the self. Who is the self? Where is their self that caused this anger, right? And then the next question is, well, why did I allow that anger why did I let that action cause me anger? And then you move on to the next question. Well, what is the response? How did I react to that anger? And then you can ask yourself, well, who reacted to that anger? Who's answering these questions? And so if we do and follow that journey correctly, diligently, then we have a much better chance of having true happiness, having a life of desirelessness, right? That is our ultimate goal, is to be desireless. Thank you for bringing that up. That was a very good observation. Yeah, sometimes it's too. Well, it's not disconnecting. It's just it's practicing mindfulness more. Okay, let me backtrack. Trying to be mindful 24/7 is difficult, right? We can't be mindful 24/7. Most people can't be mindful 24/7. But the more you practice to be mindful, then when the anger does arise, you are practicing, the quicker it is for us to see all the objects as they arise when they arise. And we can tackle it right then and there as they arise. Or maybe a few seconds later, or maybe a few minutes later. Otherwise, we just let it run on and cause more problems, more issues, more suffering, and by the time we recognize the suffering it's causing us, it's 2 years later. So just, I'm not being mindful 24/7, but I can at least say that I believe I'm practiced enough that when I do feel anger, sometimes I'm not as quick to get rid of it. I'll give myself that. But for the most part, if you see me in a mood one day, the next day I'm a whole different person. I think, I hope. It's a plan, right? Maybe, I don't know. Can't ask him. He's seen my good side, he's seen my bad side so far. Being able to be mindful and to be able to be aware is that when unwholesome or negative thoughts arise, that we don't cling to them, that we don't hang on to them, and we're able to recognize, acknowledge, and let go so we don't let it affect us. Because there's not a single thing or person that can ever cause you suffering or happiness. But me throwing it is not what caused you suffering. Your reaction to me throwing it is what's causing you suffering. The same way if I gave you this and it's full of gold coins and you feel happy and ecstatic, now you're rich. The fact that I gave you a bowl full of coins is not what's causing you happiness or suffering. Right? So it's an internal formation. So nothing externally can ever cause you pain and suffering, suffering and happiness. It's how we react to things, how we hold on to things, how we are able to let go of things that will bring us happiness or suffering. 100%, right? And I'm always teasing myself that the one superpower that I've attained since becoming a monk is being unoffendable. Being like, well, you should care. Why? Why should I care? If someone calls me names or calls me or tries to offend me or whatever, why should I care? It doesn't do anything to me. But the reason people get offended is because you're allowing that power of those words to cause you pain. Who I am? Don't they know how important I am? Don't they know what my title is? Don't they know what my status is? How dare they call me these names? And so the mind, the ego, is trying to defend itself. That's the only reason why we feel offended. Because the mind is simply just trying to defend itself and say, don't let them say that to you. You're not this, you're not that. Then you can ask yourself, well, who's saying that? Who is not this? Who is not that? Show it to me. If you can show me who's being offended, I will enlighten you. 100% enlighten you. Can you do that? Then where's the offense? Who's feeling offended? But see, that is understanding. But we don't realize that, right? We don't have that realization yet. Most of us don't have that realization yet. I'm not important enough to be offended. That's how I see it. The other side of that is the formula I give to myself. Is what they're offending, is what they're saying to me true? Yes or no? That's at least how I attain the superpower. Ask yourself, is it true? Because if what they're saying to you is true, you know it's true and they know it's true, why are you offended? If it's not true, you know it's not true and they probably also know it's not true, why are you offended? Don't let them say that about you. But if you remind yourself that you're not that important and they're not that important, it's easy to just be like, whatever. Move on with your life. We're two white, bald-headed monks in San Antonio, very conservative place. Can you imagine we go out almost every other day, just getting stared down, getting questioned? I don't care. Hopefully he doesn't care either. But it's an odd sight to see, right? Behind our backs, which we've heard several times. If that bothered me, then I would never go out. I would cover myself up and look like a normal person because I'm scared of what people would say. I don't care. What does it do to me? It doesn't do anything to me, so I don't care. I'll go out in my robes. Yeah, sure. This very white, bald-headed guy in yellow, but that's how we're able to let go. Because if we're able to let go of the self, even just a fraction of it, right? Which is the first fetter, right? Because there's 10 fetters, and these 10 fetters, if they are what's the word I'm looking for? Let go of just the first 3 fetters, you can become a Sutapatthana, stream enter, right? The first level of enlightenment. And the first one is non-self, which is also very difficult, right? It's just as difficult. But once it's broken, everything else actually becomes much easier until you get to the Arhat level. At that point, you have to do a lot of extra work. But at least for non-self, just biting off a small portion or realizing a small portion of non-self is enough, right? Is enough to, I hope, to give us the motivation to continue to want to do more, right? Because if you do the practices, if you do the exercises that we just talked about recognizing where anger comes from, why it arose, how it affected us, and ask yourself who feels this anger. If you do that for everything, not just anger, but for any other desire that is within this whole journey, and you recognize that it brings you suffering, just that alone, you've already cut off a small section of non-self. Because right now you understand. But you have to go out into the world and put it into practice. And the more you do it, and the more comfortable you become, right, with not allowing people to influence you or cause you pain or suffering and whatnot. They're so short that it's difficult sometimes to recognize. But every time we meditate or we read or we study and we have this realization of aha, of this moment of true penetration, that is an enlightening moment. It will maybe only last for a few seconds or a few minutes, but that's why we practice, so that we can extend that period for long. Okay, I'm actually stop talking now. Any last minute questions, concerns before we sit for meditation and observe your desires? And then even after we sit and we do our walking meditation, even during walking, right? I know we don't talk about walking meditation a lot. Do walking meditation, which in itself is the practice of walking meditation can be very enlightening, right? The Buddha has said several times that even with just walking meditation, we can become enlightened. But there's a very specific formula. Practice or teach or talk about it too much, unfortunately, but we follow the same type of practice when we do sitting meditation, right? Because when we do sitting meditation, we're observing the mind, the breath. The breath is our object of meditation, and we focus on that breath of the breathing in, breathing out. When we do walking meditation, we supplement breathing. We're observing in and out, or the rising and falling. For walking meditation, we can do as little as 2 steps, lifting and placing, or just simply right, left for our steps, right? The move everybody else. And so when we do walking meditation, you're going to look down to the ground, right, maybe 2-3 feet ahead of you, and you're being mindful of the sensation of the feet on the ground, right? So when I do walking meditation, I do 3 steps: lifting, shifting, and placing. That's my 3 objects: lifting or left for those steps, however you want to do it, right? But that becomes your object of meditation. it's easier in walking meditation for distractions to not arise. That doesn't mean they won't arise, right? Because you can, even with feeling the actual sensation, the physicality of the feet touching the ground, sometimes that's not even strong enough to follow the same steps. What desire is this? What distraction am I trying to fulfill? Desire that I'm trying to fulfill. So pay attention in walking too. Okay. We'll be sitting. And we'll be walking. So do a very quick stretch if you need it. Please rise for walking meditation. Sit down. Welcome back. How many desires did you count? None? Raw lions? That's good. That's exactly what needs to happen. Have realizations. Good realization, especially when we have a desire to want to get something right or want to do it right. That's simply a different way of saying expectation. And then there's a desire to want to do it right, and a desire to want to ensure that doing it wrong doesn't occur. Right? So even within the one desire, there's a plethora of little mini ones that may go along with it. Is exactly what's supposed to happen. It's a good job. You did exactly what you're supposed to do. Just like anything else that we practice, the more we practice, the easier it becomes to recognize the desires that arise. What's more time-consuming is going to this place. Because it's oftentimes that when we do dig down to get to the root of the desires, in and of itself, in that process, can be enough to get rid of that desire. Not all the time, depending on what the desire is. There's a lot of time if you dig deep enough to the root cause, right? You go down this hole of why is this? Why? So a lot of times when you get to that root, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, why? Right? You're like, you're questioning your whole life choices. And the simple recognition and realization of that is enough to have that desire to just melt away, fade away. But that works for a lot of the bigger desires, right? Some of the more internal desires are a little bit more tricky, where that may not work. But like, just think of anything big. Buying a new house, right? Why do you want to buy a new house? Have a fancier car. Why do you want a fancier car, right? So it's those types of desires that when you dig down to the root cause and recognize what the root cause, of course, they'll be different for everybody, but it's the bigger desires where it's much easier. You would think a big desire requires big work and big letting go, but it's actually the easiest ones to let go, or the bigger desires. It's the smaller ones that are more difficult to eradicate, right? Like the 5 sense desires that we talked about: sex, money, reputation. That require more work, again, not impossible. But it's the bigger ones that are much easier to let go, which I think, for at least not more beneficial than the 5 sense desires, because those are still bad, right? And we still want to let those go. But the bigger ones is easier, because the bigger ones do have something to do with the small sense desires. So like having a big house and a fancy car falls under that sense desire of reputation, right? Reputation doesn't just mean people know you, but it's how people are like, ooh, this person must be rich, they must have a good job, they must have a lot of money, et cetera, right? And that's the image you're trying to portray. And so if you let go of the desire for wanting a big house, fancy car, and status and whatnot, you've already worked toward getting rid of that core senses. Because big house and fancy car requires a lot of money. Where does a lot of money come from? Fancy paying job, right? And so these are all interconnected, right? Which is a good thing for the most part, but it's difficult to see that from the starting point, right? Because we can't really see the finish line from the starting point because you have to run, you have to do the whole lap and everything and come back around. But as you progress and you get closer and closer and you're able to see it and it gets easier and easier at the end, meaning you don't have any realization of how to get rid of desires, you don't have the realization of the impermanence of these desires, then you'll never see the finish line, right? So it takes time, it takes work, it takes effort, but it is not impossible. Trust me. It's difficult, but it's not impossible. That's the joy of the nature in reality and what is reality. And then we just have little mini aha moments here and there, and eventually it'll have fully outgrown this universe. Okay, any last minute questions, realizations?
You say desires itself are not
right? Because we have to have a desire to eat, for instance, right? Food is sustenance for our survival. But people who cling to desire end up obese, unhealthy, right? They consume too much, they consume the wrong things, and it affects themselves and it affects the people around them. So when you have a desire, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves is it full? Anything that causes clinging is a bad desire. Too much food, obviously, is unhealthy. Bad food is unhealthy. Processed food is unhealthy. Nobody's forcing you to eat bad food, right? I'm not shoving it down your throat. You're making the choice to eat the way you eat. You're making a choice to eat a $300 steak versus a $20 steak. You're versus just eating simply, eating healthy, eating fresh, right? You have the choice. But this choice is because of desire. It is, because we all want to do right? Or we all want our practice, because it is harmful to yourself, because now you're obsessing over, I need to do this right, I need to get this right, I need to be in this stage of my meditation, I need to be in this level of my practice. Well, unfortunately, you may or may not get there. So obsessing over it isn't going to be helpful, right? We hope that we'll get there, but we have no guarantee. To do with how our mind works. And it affects how we view the conditions of our life and our practice. Traditional Middle Eastern values of how sons should be portrayed. There was a lot of ideology that was put upon me, a lot of pressure that I had growing up to be a certain way, to do certain things, to fulfill this and do that, etc., etc., etc. That even now in my adulthood, as an adult, right, prior to Quang being here, right, it's just me, right? So almost everything fell upon me to do it, which to me, unfortunately, felt natural because that's how I grew up. Everything fell on me. So doing things on my own, suffering on my own, without having anyone to talk to or to confined in. I couldn't do anything about it. I'm here on my own. I couldn't fix my problem even if I wanted to. Right? And so that then leaked into my practice. Because now that, well, if I'm the only one here, and for God knows how long I'll be the only one here, then all the future of this temple is also on me. So I feel like I need to know everything. I need to teach. Because if it's only me and there's no one else to teach, then what's going to happen? I still feel very reserved. I still feel like I still have to continue the way I've been continuing because there's no guarantee. I know I'll never leave because I just know myself. But I can't make the same guarantee for him. I can't make the same guarantee for Abbot or the Abbess. For all I know, they could get up and leave too, right? Like, you know what? I'm out. This is too much for me. Well, guess what? It's too much for me. I'm sucking it up. I'm doing it because the point is, yeah, it's conditioning, right? So like, but the good thing about that is because you have an idea, or at least have a feeling of why those feelings arise due to trauma or due to whatever may be in the past, you can start to unravel those. You can start to peel those away, right? And make the mental conversation with yourself that this isn't the way it is anymore. The past affects you because of past trauma. You have the power to say, I'm not going to let you affect me. Right? You have the power. I just wrote down a note to myself that how dare I ever give power to someone to influence my peace? Influence us. Right? So you can tell yourself, how dare I give someone that power? Because then it puts you accountable. Makes you accountable. Right? That's why we take precepts. Because the precepts are holding yourself accountable to your thoughts, speech, and actions. The 5 precepts is to abstain from killing, lying, stealing, sexual misconduct, and intoxicants. These aren't religious rules. Almost every major world religion follows in some way. Right? What happens when you kill? You go to jail. Maybe you get killed. What happens when you steal? You go to jail. You may lose the trust of others. What happens when you commit sexual misconduct? You're sleeping with someone who's married or in a relationship, or you're doing it. Now you've ruined someone else's life. You've ruined your life. You've ruined the marriage or relationship. What happens when you lie, right, or steal? And if you abstain from them, then you have nothing to worry about, right? That's why the precepts are important, because if you not steal, no, I will not commit sexual misconduct, no, I will not lie, no, I will not take intoxicants, then you have no reason to ever have anything wrong go on in your life. Same way when those types of thoughts arise during meditation, if I need to get this right, you have the power to stop that in its tracks. Because you have the good desire to want to succeed. You have the good desire to want to become enlightened, right? So that means that overpowers whatever past trauma has happened. We have to remember that. Because otherwise we're going to be like, you know what, that past has no power over the mind only has power over the past and the future, because that's what it can control. It cannot control the present. That's when we were trying to meditate, we get distracted, because the mind's all like, I have no power in this present moment, so I'm going to distract you with past trauma. I'm going to distract you with future anxieties. That's why we get distracted, because the mind has been in practice, then we become the masters of our mind, then we can control the present moment for ourselves. And so when those ideas and those thoughts and those feelings and stuff arise, we can stop it in its tracks. We have power over it. The same way you don't want to allow others to have power over you, you don't want your mind to have power over yourself either. Because we are not our mind, right? So when we're asking, and you are not your mind. glad you had that realization to continue. Use it. Okay, any last minute things? Okay. Continue with our next class and our retreat on the 20th of June. And I hope everyone will attend. Please join me in invoking the Buddha's name 3 times and transferring the merit. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and I wish them full enlightenment.